My trip to New England took me through 12 states, 4.5 days, and over 3,200 miles. There were four reasons for going back home. Besides being homesick, it was to visit relatives, some of whom I haven't seen in over 50 years, visit my old sixth grade school teacher and his wife, who both recently turned 90 and celebrated their 67th wedding anniversary, to do some sea kayaking off the coast of Maine, and to also return the remainder of my mom's ashes to the lake in New Hampshire where she grew up as a child. My first stop once arriving back in New England was Mystic, Connecticut. Connecticut is known as the Constitution State. One of the original 13 colonies, it became the fifth state to join the Union in January 9, 1788. It's ranked 48th in area. Its largest city is Bridgeport. Mystic, Connecticut, settled in 1654, sits near the eastern border of Connecticut and Rhode Island. It's actually a village comprised of two towns, Groton on the west side of the Mystic River and Stonington on the east side of the river. Anyone who has seen the movie Mystic Pizza will probably recognize some of the images in this photo show. The Mystic River Bridge was designed by Thomas Ellis Brown, who's the chief engineer for the Otis Elevator Company. The bridge was built in 1920 and spans the Mystic River. It's 218 feet in length, and this bridge was featured in the movie Mystic Pizza. One of the most popular tourist destinations in the New England area, Mystic offers a bustling seaport, shopping, historical landmarks, museums and galleries, luxury and bed and breakfast accommodations, and a variety of other activities and amenities for travelers. The restaurant Mystic Pizza played a prominent role in the 1988 movie Mystic Pizza, about three teenage girls coming of age while working at the pizza parlor. The movie starred Matt Damon, Julia Roberts, Annabeth Gish, Lily Taylor, and Vincent D'Onofrio. I had to stop here to get a pizza, of course. Inside the restaurant, the walls are lined with photos from the movie, and they play the movie on the widescreen TV throughout the day. There are a lot of fine restaurants, including many oyster bars like this one, and a variety of shops located in Mystic. One of the things I liked most about growing up in New England were the beautiful homes. There are many colonial homes that line the banks of the Mystic River and throughout New England that give the region its charm. It was seeing homes like these that reminded me that I was back in New England. How I had missed seeing this kind of architecture. My main reasons for wanting to stop in Mystic, Connecticut were to visit the Mystic Seaport Museum and to do some paddling on the Mystic River and to paddle around the many wooden sailing ships that were there at the museum. One of the sailing ships at the Mystic Seaport Museum is the Joseph Conrad. It was a training ship built in Denmark in 1882, one of the smallest fully rigged ships built in modern times. Originally called the George Stage, she was accidentally run down by a British freighter and sunk in 1905, taking 22 young cadets with her. She was raised, repaired, and put back into service, and was eventually sold to Great Britain before finally being sold to the United States. The Mystic Seaport Museum features a replica of the Brant Point Light that is located on Nantucket Island in Massachusetts. The original light was built in 1746. The Mystic Seaport Museum consists of several buildings built in the 1800s and transported to the museum. In the background, you see the Charles W. Morgan. They hold rigging classes there for people. You can see some of the students in the class up in the rigging. Here we see the Charles W. Morgan at the Mystic Seaport Museum. It's the last masted whaling ship in existence. Buildings like these were common in New England seafaring villages in the 19th century. After spending 2 days in Connecticut, it was time for me to head up to New Hampshire, my home state. New Hampshire is known as the Granite State. It has the motto, "Live free or die." One of the original 13 colonies, New Hampshire became the 9th state to join the Union on June 21, 1788. New Hampshire has the smallest coastline of all the states, only 13 miles in length, and the state itself is ranked 46th in area. Mount Washington is the highest peak in the Northeast. The fastest wind speeds ever recorded were recorded on Mount Washington. The speeds reached 231 miles per hour. Manchester is New Hampshire's largest city. The Kancamagus Highway is a 34.5-mile scenic drive along New Hampshire's Route 112 in northern New Hampshire that is well known as one of the best fall foliage viewing areas in the country. The Kancamagus Highway is now designated an American Scenic Byway for its rich history, aesthetic beauty, and culture. It passes through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. One of my favorite places in New Hampshire to visit when I'm home is Franconia Notch State Park. Here we see one of the footbridges across the Pemigewasset River. The Flume Gorge, which is in the Franconia Notch State Park, is one of my most favorite places in all of New Hampshire. It's extremely beautiful, and I go there every time I return to my home state. New England wouldn't be New England without the covered bridges, and New Hampshire is full of them. Here we see the Flume Covered Bridge that was built in 1871 and is listed with the World Guide of Covered Bridges. This covered bridge spans the Pemigewasset River in Franconia Notch State Park. The Flume Gorge in Franconia Notch State Park is a naturally made gorge created by glaciers. This wooden trail system extends the length of the gorge, giving people a perfect view of the Pemigewasset River that flows through the gorge and the moss and fern-covered cliff walls. Here we see more of the wooden trail system extending along the Flume Gorge. In the background is Avalanche Falls. The gorge extends 800 feet at the base of Mount Liberty. The walls of granite rise to a height of 90 feet and range from 12 to 20 feet apart. While walking on the trail in Franconia Notch State Park to the Sentinel Covered Bridge, I came across a sugar maple with a cavity and these mushrooms growing inside that cavity. I stayed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire during my time there in my home state. Portsmouth is an old city. It was settled in 1623 and incorporated in 1653. It's home to the oldest naval shipyard, though technically the shipyard is on the other side of the Piscataqua River in Kittery, Maine. It's where John Paul Jones's ship, the Ranger, was constructed. John Paul Jones lived in Portsmouth. My first day back in New Hampshire, I was hungry. I had worked up an appetite. And what better thing to eat than Maine lobster? And why have only one when you can have two? Historic Newcastle Island sits in the Piscataqua River just off Portsmouth, but it's actually its own town. It was settled in 1623 and incorporated in 1693. An earthwork defense was built on Fort Point, which would evolve into Fort William and Mary, and was the site of one of the first acts of the American Revolution. There's a hotel on this island called Wentworth by the Sea that I really wanted to stay at, but at $500 a night, it was a little out of my price range. Strawberry Bank is a historic part of Portsmouth. It's unique among outdoor history museums in presenting a complete neighborhood's evolution over 300 plus years, with most of the 37 historic buildings on their original foundations. These structures link visitors to people who lived on the Portsmouth waterfront from 1695 to 1954. Here we see some of the homes at Strawberry Bank Museum. The red building you see is the Penhallow House, built in 1750. It's the 18th century home of Deacon Samuel Penhallow. The building you're looking at is the Walsh home. It was the home of Sea Captain Kieran Walsh. The home itself was built in 1796. There are a lot of beautiful old colonial homes in Portsmouth. These homes were near the Strawberry Bank Museum. The red building you're seeing here at Strawberry Bank Museum is the Jones House, home of Joshua Jones. It was built in 1790. Here we see some more beautifully elegant and stately homes dating back to the 1700s and early 1800s, located near the Portsmouth waterfront. Another view of some of the homes in the previous slide. This was taken from the bridge over to Pierce Island. Here we see downtown Portsmouth at night, where several fine restaurants are located along the waterfront. Parking can be kind of hard to find around here, and it can be kind of pricey at some of the parking lots where they charge $10 an hour. Your best bet is to find metered parking along the street. I found some eventually, but I had to drive around for a little bit. One of the cities I wanted to visit on my drive up to the lake regions in New Hampshire was the city of Rochester, where I was born. I doubt little has changed since I was born there 61 years ago. Spalding High, where my mother went to, still looks unchanged from the picture of it in her yearbook. My next destiny on my New England adventure was Maine. Maine is known as the Pine Tree State. It was actually part of Massachusetts during colonial times. It's larger than the other 5 New England states combined. It became the 23rd state on March 15, 1820. Ranked 39th in the area, the largest city is Portland. The highest point is Mount Katahdin. As I had previously mentioned, one of my main reasons for going back to New England was reconnecting with relatives I hadn't seen in over 50 years. One of those relatives was my cousin Henry. Here I am up at his cabin on Lake Mousom. The lake is near the Maine-New Hampshire border. I'd gone there for a barbecue with many of my relatives who haven't seen me since I was a toddler. Here I am on the left with my relatives from my Aunt Betty's side, who's seated in the chair. Next to me is my cousin Martha, my cousin Henry, my cousin Darrell, and the woman in the middle leaning on the table is my cousin Bonnie. One of the places I stopped on my travel up to the Stonington Archipelago was the city of Freeport. Freeport, Maine is the home of L.L. Bean, so I wanted to stop in there and check out the whole campus. Here we're looking at the campus of the flagship store. The campus houses the main building, featuring hunting, fishing, camping, clothing, books, and dog products. There's a home store building there where you can purchase furnishings, bedding, culinary items, and a paddle, bike, and ski store. There's a Ben & Jerry's ice cream parlor on the campus, and also a lobster shack where you can buy lobster rolls. In the summer, there's a stage set up in the middle of the campus that hosts musical acts. You need to get to the campus early because L.L. Bean is popular, and the several large parking lots fill up rather quickly. Here I am standing next to the booth that made L.L. Bean famous. The L.L. Bean flagship store is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the main reasons I made my trek across country back to New England was so I could bring my sea kayak with me and do some paddling off the coast of Maine. Maine has got an extensive coastline that, if you unraveled it, would extend all the way from the Canadian border to Florida. The town of Stonington, Maine sits on Deer Isle and offers visitors a look into the unique culture of Down East Maine. Stunning, unspoiled physical beauty abounds on the island and supports commercial and recreational activities. Stonington waters are home to a working fleet of more than 300 lobster boats, and in the summer, recreational boats and kayaks. In the late 1800s, granite quarries from the island supplied stone to historic structures and later for John F. Kennedy's memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. Granite is quarried to this day on the islands. Here is the view of the kayak launch at Old Quarry Ocean Adventures, where I was camping. I was supposed to spend one night out on one of the islands out in the Stonington archipelago, but the remnants of Hurricane Gordon blew in the day that I was supposed to be camping on the island, so I had to stay at the campground. Here is a view of one of the many islands located in the Stonington archipelago as seen from my kayak. The islands are all relatively close together, so it doesn't take long to paddle from one island to the next. Hell's Half Acre is a popular island for paddlers to stop at and either rest, have lunch, or camp. In the background there is Coon Island. Here is another view from Hell's Half Acre of some of the other islands. Coot Island is in the background. Camp Island is to the right. The islands are part of the Maine Island Trail Association, an organization that maintains and helps manage numerous private and state-owned islands so the public can enjoy visiting the islands. Some are off limits, but many allow day use and some even allow camping. In this photo, we're looking at McGlathry Island. It's one of the many islands in the Stonington archipelago. I wanted to spend a little bit of time visiting the island and looking at the many granite boulders that were deposited there from the receding ice sheet. But because of the remnants of Hurricane Gordon that had come into the area the day before, I couldn't camp out on the island. So there wasn't time for me to really spend visiting any of the islands. I really only had time just to paddle around them. Stonington, Maine is home to the largest lobster fleet in the state, and here we see a lobsterman setting his traps. Being a lobsterman is a tough living. Lobster boats are required to display a lobster buoy on the mast matching the same colors of the fishermen's lobster buoys in the water. This way other boaters can identify where the lobster boats will be working and be able to avoid getting in the lobsterman's way. This photo shows a picture of Crotch Island in the distance from my vantage point on Rock Island. Crotch Island contains a large granite quarry that is still active today. Much of the rose-tinted granite extracted from the island was used to build many of the buildings in New York City. And mining has gone on there at Crotch Island since the 1870s. Behind the two sailboats anchored near Flea Island is Scott Island, where mining for granite is still going on. The town of Stonington is located on Deer Isle, and Deer Isle is connected to Little Deer Isle by a causeway. And to get to either of those islands, you have to travel over this suspension bridge that links the islands to Maine's mainland. After leaving Stonington, my next major destination was Mount Desert Island, home to Acadia National Park. The town of Bar Harbor is the largest town on Mount Desert Island. It's named after the island that sits just off the shore of Mount Desert Island. Bar Island and Bar Harbor are linked by a sandbar that at low tide allows people in Bar Harbor to walk across it to Bar Island. The area was settled in 1763. The town was a very popular summer residence for the wealthy, including John D. Rockefeller Jr., Cornelius Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, the Astor family, and President William Taft. In the fall of 1947, a massive wildfire destroyed much of the town, including homes of the wealthy, and over 10,000 acres of Acadia National Park. Bar Harbor is a popular tourist destination for people coming by car, plane, or cruise ship. The town has several fine restaurants, hotels, bed and breakfast, and lots of shops. Bar Harbor is home to the largest parts of Acadia National Park, including Cadillac Mountain, the highest point within 25 miles of the coastline of the eastern United States. One of the most recognized and photographed man-made structures on Mount Desert Island is the arched wooden footbridge in Somesville, Maine, that sits next to the historic Selectmen building that was built in 1780. This is the Hulls Cove Visitor Center entrance to Acadia National Park, one of the most visited and popular national parks in the system. Acadia National Park protects the natural beauty of the highest rocky headlands along the Atlantic coastline of the United States, an abundance of habitats with high biodiversity, clean air and water, and a rich cultural heritage. Each year, more than 3.3 million people explore 7 peaks above 1,000 feet, 158 miles of hiking trails, and 45 miles of carriage roads with 16 stone bridges. One of the most picturesque lighthouses in all of the United States is Bass Harbor Light, located in Acadia National Park. The lighthouse was built in 1858. Thunder Hole, located in Acadia National Park, is a small inlet naturally carved out of the rocks where the waves roll into. At the end of this inlet, down low, is a small cavern where, when the rush of the waves arrives, air and water is forced out like a clap of distant thunder. Water may spout as high as 40 feet with a thunderous roar, hence the name Thunder Hole. The railings take a beating from the winter storms and often have to be replaced. The lower landing was closed while I was there, but people climb out onto the rocks to get a different vantage point of the waves crashing against the shore. Maine's rugged granite coastline is spectacular, whether you see it from the land or the water. For as small of a state as Maine is, it has more coastline than the state of California. Here we see Jordan Pond at sunset. Jordan Pond is more lake than pond, actually. It reaches a maximum depth of 150 feet. The water is exceptionally clear with an average visibility depth of 46 feet. Because it serves as the water supply for Bar Harbor, swimming is not allowed. However, non-motorized boats, such as canoes and kayaks, are permitted on the lake. The Jordan Pond House is the only full-service restaurant within Acadia National Park. The 2 peaks you see in the distance there are North and South Bubble. The Porcupine Islands and Bar Island, located there in the lower left, are just off the coast of Bar Harbor. Sheep Porcupine Island, which is the second island from the left, and Bald Porcupine Island, which is the island in the lower right, are part of Acadia National Park. This shot was taken from Cadillac Mountain, the highest peak on the eastern seaboard. It's also the first place in the continental United States to witness the sunrise, making it a popular viewpoint. You practically need to get there 2 hours before sunrise if you want to get a decent parking space. Bar Harbor is located there in the distance. I kayaked around all 5 of the islands in the foreground. John D. Rockefeller Jr., a resident of Bar Harbor, abhorred the automobile. He didn't want them on the island, and for many years autos were prohibited from the island. When the automobile was finally allowed on the island, Rockefeller, still not a fan of the noisy contraption, built his own road system on the island, giving the island its carriage roads. The carriage roads in Acadia National Park were built between 1913 and 1940. Rockefeller made sure the roads flowed with a natural setting rather than reshaping the land to accommodate. The carriage road network includes 57 miles of woodland roads free of motor vehicles, of which 45 miles are within Acadia National Park. The road system remains the best example of turn-of-the-century broken stone roads in America. The carriage road system is popular with cyclists and for people who want to get out and walk the roads. It was mid-September when I was back in Acadia National Park, and fall had started to make its appearance. New England is best noted probably for its fall colors, which reached their peak in mid-October. Sugar maples turning red, beeches orange, and birches yellow set the hills ablaze in color. The leaves were just starting to turn while I was there. There is even a name for the annual migration of visitors traveling to New England to view the fall colors, leaf peeping. This red squirrel is one of many that you're likely to encounter when visiting Acadia National Park. These little squirrels are everywhere, and they're not shy. Many of them will come right up to you. In this photo, my friend and fellow kayaker, Peter Gage, was checking out the keyhole on Burnt Porcupine Island. Some of the Porcupine Islands are part of Acadia National Park, and all the islands, with the exception of Bar Island, are only accessible by boat. I call this wave crashing on Long Porcupine Island the Mitten, and perhaps you can see why. It was off this island that Peter and I spotted two harbor porpoises. The southern face of the islands is much different than the northern face. As the ice sheet began retreating, it gouged out the southern face, dragging rock with it to grind down the northern end. If you look at the islands from the side, you'll notice the steep south side and the sloping north side. I only had a couple of days in Acadia National Park, way too short of a time to really get to enjoy the park before I had to head on to Portland, Maine. Portland is Maine's largest city. While most visitors to Portland probably want to see the glamorous, glitzy side of the city and dine at fine restaurants, I wanted to see the grittier side of Portland. So I spent half a day just hanging around the fishing piers. Lobster fishing is one of the main livelihoods of Mainers. The Portland waterfront bustles with activity as lobstermen unload their daily catches at the fishing piers. There are many fine restaurants along the waterfront that serve lobster fresh off the boats daily. You can get other foods as well. This is a view of the fish market area where you can purchase fish right from the fishermen. I loved exploring and photographing the grittier side of Portland. The dome you see rising above the brown building in the background is the Customs House that is still in use today. Portland is an old city, as reflected in the many cobblestone roads you're likely to encounter while driving around Portland. This is 4th Street near the hotel where I stayed, looking west. Portland was incorporated in 1786. The city relies heavily on tourism. Portland, Oregon, near where I live, takes its name after Portland, Maine, following a coin flip between Asia Lovejoy from Boston and Frances Pettygrove from Maine. Old Portland is popular with tourists and features many shops and outdoor cafes. This is a view of 4th Street looking east. You get a little better view of the Customs House there in the background. I had to stop by the boyhood home of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow since he's a distant relative. Guided tours are offered daily of the house. The Maine Historical Society also offers guided tours of Portland. While visiting Portland, Maine, I wanted to do a little paddling around Casco Bay. and one of the destinations I wanted to see was Fort George's, which sits on Hog Island Ledge, a small island 1 mile out into Casco Bay from Portland. Construction began on the fort in 1857. Along with Fort Scammell, it guards the entrance to Portland Harbor. The fort was completed in 1865 as the Civil War ended, but by then the fort was obsolete. Because of all the ships, ferries, fishing boats, and pleasure craft plying the waters around the many islands in Casco Bay, paddling around this area requires paying close attention to the surroundings. There are no ferries out to Fort George's, so the only way you can reach the fort is by kayak. Here you see a view of the parade grounds within Fort George's. The fort's armament consisted of 34 10-inch Rodman guns mounted in the fort's casements. In 1898, all the guns were removed from the fort except a large 300-pounder Parrott rifle, which you can see in the inset, which was on top of the fort but not mounted. The 300-pounder Parrott rifle still remains in place and is one of the largest surviving specimens of Civil War vintage artillery. There are no ferries out to Fort George's. The only way you can reach the fort is by small boat. Here you see a view of the parade grounds within Fort George's. The fort's armament consisted of 34 10-inch Rodman guns mounted in the fort's casements. In 1898, all guns were removed from the fort except a large 300-pounder Parrott rifle, which you can see in the inset, which was on top of the fort but not mounted. The 300-pounder Parrott rifle still remains in place and is one of the largest surviving specimens of Civil War vintage artillery. While paddling around Casco Bay, and specifically around Little Diamond Island, I came across this rock formation that had the most beautiful coloration. This photo does not do justice to the colors that really were on display there in the rocks. The most iconic and probably most photographed lighthouse in the world, and certainly my favorite lighthouse, Portland Head Light, is situated in Fort Williams Park, just south of Portland. Construction started in 1787 and completed in 1791. It has gone through several modifications since then, including the addition of the keeper's house and raising the light 20 feet. The lighthouse was fully automated in 1989. The Coast Guard still maintains the light and foghorn, but the rest of the lighthouse is owned by the town of Cape Elizabeth. Portland Head Light is one of 6 lighthouses within a 20-mile radius of Portland. Just south of Portland Head are the twin lights of Cape Elizabeth Lighthouse. Other lighthouses include Ram Island Ledge, Portland Breakwater Lighthouse, and the Spring Point Ledge Lighthouse. Here we see Norwegian Cruise Line's Splendor of the Sea passing Portland Head Light. My 3,200-mile journey across the United States to New England took me through 12 states. The following slides are just some of the sights that I saw during my cross-country travel. The southern half of Wyoming is pretty barren, but there were some interesting sights to see along the way. Some I could see, others I didn't have the time to visit, like Flaming Gorge. One site I did get to see between Laramie and Cheyenne is Tree Rock. This small pine tree has fascinated travelers since the first Union Pacific train rolled past this area in the mid-1800s. The age of the tree is unknown, but trees of this species have been known to live as long as 2,000 years. Also visible from Tree Rock is the Sherman Mountain Range with its unique features. My drive through Nebraska took me past Cabela's headquarters in Sidney. I also encountered some tremendous winds in Nebraska. Being a railroad buff, I just had to stop at Union Pacific's Bailey Yard in North Platte, Nebraska. Bailey Yard is the world's largest classification yard. An average of 139 trains and over 14,000 railroad cars pass through Bailey Yard every day, and the yard sorts approximately 3,000 cars daily using the yard's 2 humps. This is a view of the engine servicing facility They can repair up to 750 locomotives monthly. While Nebraska is mainly flat, Iowa consists of a lot of rolling hills. I ran into some powerful storms while crossing through Iowa. Two of the storms I encountered, it rained so heavy that I had to turn my headlights on, slow to a crawl, and put my windshield wipers on full bore. This is the first of two powerful thunderstorms I encountered during my drive through Iowa. My drive through Utah from the Idaho border to Ogden was probably the shortest drive I had through any of the states I had to go through. But on the eastern end of Utah was this lovely canyon with tremendously colorful rocks. One of Union Pacific's busiest rail routes runs through the canyon there in eastern Utah. Here we see a mixed freight train heading west into Ogden. For further information on any of the three states that I visited while back in New England, check out these following websites: www.visitmaine.com, www.visitnh.com, www.ctvisit.com, and www.mita.org. To see videos of my paddle trips and hikes and walks around New England, go to www.youtube.com and search on Radford Bean. I hope you enjoyed this slide presentation.